All right. Well, now, Halitics, I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to talk to you today, Tuesday. It's the 30th. Yes, I had to look at my computer date just to be certain that I got it right, because I got a lot of things wrong. I know I do. So I try to be as correct as I can be, and also give you the information so that when you aren't sure if what I'm saying is persuasive, is credible, then you can judge it for yourself. Obviously, that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to put together a dialogue, a discussion to come up with solutions to very, very serious, not nay, but dare I say, existential threats we face: endless war, the climate cataclysm, the new Holocaust, as I call it, and other very, very, very serious issues that beset so many, really, around the planet, billions of people, hundreds of millions of Americans. I do hope you'll subscribe. Click like, click subscribe. I can't do this. Well, I can do it. I have been doing it with a very small audience, but a select audience, people who know me, who have discovered me over the years. And I just hope we can continue to grow, continue to snowball, because that's the only way we can make the positive change that I believe we need, not just for ourselves. Look, I mean, I'm on the downslide here now, 60 years old, but for my kids, and if they have children, which I don't recommend given the current state of affairs in this on this planet, but if they were to have kids, certainly I would want something better than what I think we can anticipate, tragically, for them, for the next generation and the generation to come after that generation. 240-242-5646. If you'd like to join me, I would love to talk to you. One of the assumptions I make when I do this live stream is there are certain goals, certain desires that I think most of us share. We may have different ways of getting there. We may see the solutions that would allow us to get to the answer, to get to those answers. The way we would get to those solutions is very differently. But in the end, I think most of us really do want, maybe I'm wrong though, peace. I think we all want healthcare for ourselves. I don't think there's anybody who says, I don't want healthcare, right? I don't want to be secure when I get sick, knowing that I'll be able to get the treatment that I need. I don't want to be confident that if someone in my family gets cancer, we'll never have to dip into our retirement savings, or even worse, maybe have to go bankrupt. I think all of us want to feel confident and comfortable that we'll have enough. In fact, that we'll never have to worry about financial challenges that could arise out of a medical emergency. I think that's what we all want. Maybe some of us have different ways of how to get there. So that's why I talk about Medicare for All, and why I believe, and the evidence really is irrefutable, that this is the best way for us all to get good health care. The most efficient way, the best way. I think there's, a basic desire also for peace. I think most people want, I've shown you the Goering quote where he says, yeah, of course the people want peace, but you can lead them to war if you say that those who are against the war hate our country, they're unpatriotic, they want to expose us to grave danger. And we see that all the time, right? Is the threat, oh my God, they're here, we have to fight them over there, so we don't have to fight them over here, right? Isn't that the defense? Isn't that the exact Goering argument? We're going to scare people because we're going to say, oh, you'll be in greater danger if you don't go over to Iraq and start killing Iraqis. So we have to kill them over there so they don't kill us over here. That kind of argument. But I looked at this. I put together this promotion for today's program because I was looking at some of those polls that I spend too much time looking at, but they did seem to tell a very perplexing, confusing, convoluted, paradoxical message that they give. And so I put a couple of those headlines that seem so, well, they're not reconcilable. One, new poll of voters finds overwhelming support for Israel over Hamas. in the Gaza war. And that poll, which I'll get into in a little bit greater detail, continues to say that Americans don't even want a ceasefire. And this is basically right now. According to this poll, we don't even want a ceasefire until all the hostages are released. And obviously that makes no sense, because there's no way the Hamas is going to release they made it clear they're not going to release any more hostages until Israel stops killing, bombarding, and destroying Gazans and Gaza. So you can't have both. You want a ceasefire, then you got to say, okay, we'll have a ceasefire, and then we'll talk about releasing the hostages. But that's apparently not what the poll says. The poll says, keep killing Gazans. Americans say, keep killing Gazans, keep killing civilians, keep bombing, keep massacring, keep genocidal acts going until Hamas gives up any leverage it might have. I don't know if I believe that poll, but that's what it says. Another, though, says we want a ceasefire. Most Americans, a great majority, over 2/3, are saying we want a ceasefire now. We want America to prioritize diplomacy, and we're not as strongly supportive of Israel. So it seems like those two polls don't really jibe. There's ways you can kind of finesse them, but basically they don't jibe. And then if you accept what I hope is the case, I really do. I really want to believe that most of you want a ceasefire. You want an end to the killing. Maybe you don't see the one-state solution as the only path to peace, the one that I see. Maybe you don't believe the one-state solution is the only path to true justice in the Middle East, as I do. But I hope you want the killing to stop. I have to believe most Americans want the machine gunning and the aerial bombardment by Israel to end. If that's the case, then, and I believe it is, I hope it is, although I'll be honest with you, I've talked to a lot of people, admittedly, mostly Jewish people, maybe all Jewish, I'm not sure, who don't feel that way, who take the position that Gazans are collectively responsible for what Hamas did. And aren't even willing to say, okay, there might be some things that they might say, well, Israel's maybe gone a little too far in a few areas, but we can understand why, right? They're always making excuses for Israel. So maybe that's where most of you are. I hope not. I hope not. But even if many of you are on the side of Israel and you take that position, my country wrong or wrong, because obviously Israel's wrong here, even if that's the position of most Americans, which I don't think it is, it's not the position of 98% of Americans. And yet, if you look at that poll, which is kind of hidden underneath, only 2% of you have said, in a reputable poll, by the way, we'll get into the quality of those polls in a little bit, only 2 of you have even said you'll support a pro-peace candidate. The rest of you apparently want president who is going to keep funneling arms, keep funneling money to the state, the Jewish state, where whether you agree with the term genocide or not, is, according to the International Court of Justice, acting in genocidal ways. They're promoting and they're committing genocidal acts, whether that is indeed genocide or not. You can argue that point. I made I've presented the best defense, I think, against the charge of genocide, which is no death camps, right? We're not seeing actual crematoria. There's no Auschwitz. Now, one response to that position was, well, it's an open air death camp, which isn't completely false. It's not. But it's not quite the same as where you take the inhabitants and you put them on trains or trucks and you machine gun them or you gas them. It's not quite that. So that's the argument, I suppose, the best one you can make, the best defense against the charge of genocide. And I don't totally reject that argument. I don't think it's complete nonsense either. I think there's something to that argument. I don't know if I fully accept it either. I don't. In fact, I know I don't. and I'm sympathetic to the claim that Israel's a genocidal state, but whether you support the claim of genocide or not, I just have to believe that the great majority of you don't support what Israel's doing and do think what Israel's doing is wrong and don't want Israel to keep going and killing and bombing and massacring and destroying homes and committing, what was it called? Well, homicide is when you kill a person. Homicide is not where you destroy somebody's home. But I heard the term, maybe I don't know, something where domicide, where you destroy people's homes. And clearly that is what Israel is doing. Is that genocide? No, I wouldn't go that far, but it can demonstrate a intent to wipe out a community. And if that's your intent, then yeah, and you have the capability of doing this genocide. So according to Reuters, Ipsos, which we have discussed as a reputable pollster, they are a credible, according to at least 538, my go-to source on pollsters. U.S. public support for Israel is dropping. This was over 2 months ago now. Now maybe that's changed. I would have to believe. Couldn't come up with a more recent poll from these folks. I wish I had. I've got to believe. Now I got to believe that if anything, 2 months later. I mean, remember November 15th was still. October 7th, I would think, would be somewhat fresh in people's memories. And October 7th was with the Hamas attack. So more than 2 months later, I would believe, if Ipsos is correct, and remember they're credible, that more than 3/4 of Democrats and more than half of Republicans support ceasefire, which is not what Joe Biden or RFK Jr. or Donald Trump have called for. So it would appear that you don't like, according to this poll, you don't agree with what the president and the frontrunner, the overwhelming frontrunner in the Republican primary support. So I hope that's right. And again, Reuters Ipsos seems to be a relatively credible poll, or it is credible according to our friends at 538. Now, what kind of throws this for a loop, at least from my perspective, was a Harvard-Harris poll that just came out this week. And according to Harvard-Harris, and this is quoted by Israel, the Times of Israel, which, the fact that the Times of Israel quotes them, I think tells you exactly where the poll is. But according to Harvard-Harris, the overwhelming majority of Americans support Israel and don't believe in a ceasefire right now. That is, let me see. This is from The Hill. I originally saw it from the Times of Israel. And what the Times of Israel quoted, and I looked into this, by the way, so this is accurate, at least as they report it. What the Times of Israel is saying is that most Americans don't even want a ceasefire unless first Hamas frees the hostages that it took back on October 7th. And that's kind of interesting because Israel has lots of hostages. And nobody's talking about, people that they arrest because they're allegedly rioting. They don't like when their homes are taken from them on the West Bank, or they somehow they go after some IDF soldier in Gaza. And so Israel has its own hostages. And yet they're not a concern, I guess. Is that right? They're not a concern. So here's from, this is the actual TOI. You can see bottom left there. And this is January this year, January 24th. And according to the Times of Israel, it's not the Times of Israel, it's the Harvard-Harris poll. 67% of survey respondents say there should only be a ceasefire if all hostages are freed. And the Gaza ruling terror group, well, so you can see it's clearly very tendentious. It's clearly very biased, Times of Israel's coverage. But those underlying numbers are borne out. I'm not going to show you the numbers from the Harvard-Harris poll, but they're identical to what TOI is saying there. You can go look at it if you want. Very disappointing, isn't it? It's very disheartening that, at least if this poll is anywhere near correct, that 2/3, and this is kind of the direct opposite, according to the Reuters Ipsos poll, 2/3 of Americans want a ceasefire now. According to the Harvard-Harris poll, 2/3 of Americans only want a ceasefire if the hostages are released. And my guess is that the numbers are somewhat in the middle, because perhaps the way Harvard-Harris phrased it was, oh, do you want a ceasefire or do you want the hostages released first? And obviously you put the thought of the hostages in people's minds, and you don't give them a moment to consider both sides, both options, and why a ceasefire now would likely lead to, be much more likely to lead to the freeing of the hostages down the road, which, by the way, is what the families of the hostages want. The families of the hostages have made it clear they want the killing to stop, and they want Israel to be negotiating. They're not getting that because that's not what Netanyahu wants. That is not what the IDF wants. And as far as we can tell, it doesn't seem to be what the United States wants, or certainly not what the United States is pushing. So, but there's a paradox. There's something that seems irreconcilable. 2/3 in one poll say ceasefire now. 2/3 in another poll of Americans say ceasefire only after the hostages are released. Now, one factor, and I think it's really important to bear in mind, is the quality of the two polls. And we've talked about this. Harvard-Harris, Harris-X, whatever you want to call it, it's a garbage poll, or close to it. 530, the poll that says that Americans only want a ceasefire if the terror group releases the hostages now. Otherwise, we're good, according to Harvard-Harris. We're good with more killing, with over 25,000, over 250,000 Gazan civilians killed, more genocidal acts by Israel. We're all for it. We're all gung-ho. That is, according to a pollster who's a garbage pollster, who's not credible. And by the way, Mark Penn runs Harvard-Harris. Remember, Mark Penn was so bad, was such a right-winger, an extremist, that at some point Hillary Clinton had to let him go in 2008. Not because she wanted to, not because she didn't like him, but the pressure on her campaign was such that she had to let that former Republican Mark Penn go. So take the Harvard-Harris poll with 3 grains of salt. The Reuters Ipsos poll, clearly more credible. Reuters Ipsos, a much better pollster. What I'm saying to you is the poll that says most of us want a ceasefire now, don't want preconditions, don't support our current administration's policy, which is bomb now, worry about civilian deaths later. I'm saying that poll, the poll that argues for that, is a garbage poll. There's a problem, though. If we really believe in peace, if we really want an end to the genocidal acts, notice how I'm not saying genocide, because first of all, the International Court of Justice hasn't yet concluded that Israel is committing genocide. What they have said is they're committing genocidal acts. So I will try to use the term genocidal acts, because the net impact, the net effect of what Israel's doing is genocide-like. L-I-K, not light, L-I-G-H-T, but like, L-I-K-E. I'll try to use the term genocidal acts because I want to be as accurate as possible. But to the extent that we really do oppose Israel's genocidal acts, as Reuters Ipsos tells us, there is a problem. There's a problem with another poll, and that is the presidential polls. If we really don't want more killing, more death, if we really don't support genocide, then we would, I would assume, right? I mean, you'd think if you don't believe in Israel and endless war, and you're not wholly, utterly indifferent to the suffering of the Palestinian people, then wouldn't Americans support candidates who are pro-peace, who are pro-ceasefire at a minimum? I mean, I would think so. That seems kind of obvious to me. If you believe that Israel is wrong, if you disagree with Hillary Clinton that there's something naive about supporting a ceasefire, because she said that. She says it's naive. If you don't agree with Hillary, then wouldn't you support? I mean, it seems kind of clear to me. It seems obvious. This is an easy one for me. It seems that that's where you are. You'd support pro-peace, pro-ceasefire candidates. And here is the latest from Emerson. You look at the date, it's right there. And I know Arlen. I called him Biden. Well, Arlen, Biden, so they both end with EN, right? So it's almost the same. Maybe that's a senior moment. Maybe I'm demented like Trump and Biden. I shouldn't run for president either. I'm a little younger, but I guess I'm getting close to them. But if you really don't want more killing by Israel of civilians, of innocent people, and frankly, if you don't want more Israeli soldiers, I mean, every now and then a few Israeli soldiers are killed. Hey, if you don't want more Americans killed, we saw 3 recently killed by, I guess it was an Iran attack. Apparently, maybe it was by mistake. I don't have all the details for that. If you want less death, right? Let's just say it that way. If you want more life, then wouldn't you support the candidates or the candidate who's calling for the ceasefire, who's demanding a ceasefire now? 2% of you, according to Emerson College poll, support the 2 candidates that are actually saying we need a ceasefire now. There's only 2. Now, I guess Marianne Williamson, maybe. She's kind of been all over the place. I guess she is for ceasefire, but she's also for Israel. So I'll throw her in there. But in the general election poll, 2%, when offered a choice between candidates Stein and West, who support a ceasefire now, and candidates who don't, well, that's like, if I add it up, it's 95%. I guess 3% said other. 95% of you went with a candidate who's for endless carnage, who supports Israel's genocidal acts. So I don't know what to do with that information except say, yeah, I guess Harvard-Harris is right. Because how can I conclude, how could one conclude that Americans are for the Palestinian people, for civilians, are for peace, are against domicide, destruction of homes, are against massacres, if Americans are all in for 3 candidates who are, for Israel? Period. End of story. End of conversation. End of discussion. It's very, very disheartening. Very, very sad. It's very, and I could say, well, it's because not enough people watch my live stream. Well, that's part of it, obviously. I mean, there's no question not enough of you do. But that's not that's not a good enough answer, because there are other YouTubers out there. There are other folks who are making the same points I am. And I guess it's banging off the skulls of the American public as far as I can tell. I saw an interesting video. I don't think I have it up. Maybe I'll get it later in the program this week, not today, but where the Young Turks, who have pretty much are any blue will do, pretty much any blue will do. They'll criticize Democrats, but in the end, they come back to, you can't vote for Trump. You got to vote against Trump. You got to vote for Biden. They're pretty loudly denouncing Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden for their pro-genocidal acts policies. They were doing a pretty good job with it. But what they wouldn't do, say you got to vote for Stein. You got to vote for West. Same thing with Crystal and Kyle. They'll say, oh, it's really bad what Biden took. Biden could cost himself the election if he doesn't come out, doesn't distance himself from Israel. The Arabs in Michigan are really, really angry. He'll say that, but they'll say that, but they won't come out and say, yeah, you can't vote him. It's just too evil what's going on. So I guess we don't like what we see coming out of the Middle East. We don't like the destabilization. We don't like the killing of civilians. But we don't not like it enough to actually break with any of the leaders of the parties or even the leading independent and demand something better. All right, I'm glad to have my friend John on, and I call him my friend not just because he calls, but because I met John. He came to the studio years ago when I was broadcasting in Monterey. John, it's great to hear from you. How you doing today?
I'm doing okay. Good morning.
Hey, what's going on? I know I reached out to you last week because I hadn't heard from you. I was hoping you were still interested in the live stream. I know we have our disagreements, but I was very pleased by your response. I know you've been busy, and that's great. I'm really happy about that. Your thoughts on what I'm talking about?
I just tuned in. I had to do a few things this morning. I was calling because somebody called me. It was night before last, or no? You know what? It was. Gosh, I can't remember. I think it was night before last. It was in the evening. And they were calling from Our Revolution and wanted to know if I was going to support Barbara Lee. And I said yes in the primary. And so basically Barbara Lee is one of the three Democratic contenders for the Senate seat in California, the seat that Dianne Feinstein left vacant when she passed. And Barbara Lee is the only candidate that voted against giving Bush power to use the military against Iraq. Pretty sure, she was like the only person in Congress, although I could be wrong about that.
Maybe let me just jump in. Maybe Rand Paul on the Republican side, if he was even in, or Ron Paul, maybe. Although he was on the Senate, would have been in the Senate at that point. But I think she was the only Democrat. And maybe you're probably right. I'm just thinking there may have been a Republican as well, John.
Okay. Well, anyway, so that's kind of, and I don't think she's going to I don't think she's going to beat Adam Schiff in the primary. And there's nothing I can do about that. The only thing I can do is give my support to the most progressive candidate when the primaries come around, and hope and pray that our support over the years that we gain some ground. And because I don't think that the voters, if Democratic voters cannot rally behind someone like Barbara Lee over Adam Schiff, you're certainly not going to be able to corral them over to Jill Stein in a presidential election. So I think that we have to make baby steps here, because I think you expect way too much of the electorate to support you in saying let's abandon this establishment and go this direction. We can't even get a Democrats to abandon the establishment in primary. So I just
I don't disagree. I find I really don't know what to say, John. I mean, I can come up with a lot of different explanations. I mean, I think the issue is that most voters really do perceive, and perhaps completely accurately, not just most, like 95% of voters see the choice as either Democrat or Republican. And I think voters find both parties, I think many of us, maybe not you, but maybe you, I think most of us find both parties very seriously wanting in different ways. But because we perceive our choices as so narrow that because we're humans, we want to believe that somebody's on our side. So if we accept that Trump is the Antichrist, then we're going to start to see good things in Biden. I mean, after all, the enemy of my enemy is my friend isn't complete nonsense. There's truth to that. It's not all true, but it's not all false either. And if you believe Biden is just purely a self-interested, phony, you're going to see good things in the Democratic Party is on the side of some sort of shadowy group of elites. You're going to start to believe there's something good in Donald Trump. So I think the problem we face is we can't break away from this idea that the only choices are Republican, Democrat.
I think that people have a little bit more a nuanced point of view than that. I think what they see is that Republicans are so extreme that every time that they become empowered, there's a tremendous amount of damage done, not just to our reputation around the world, not just to our credibility and the way our allies look at us, but to our own democracy. Because they get opportunities to put people on the Supreme Court, and then we get this absolute mess that we're in. If that were the only issue that somebody was going to look at is the makeup of the court, it would have been an excellent reason to vote for Hillary in 2016. It would have been an excellent reason to support her, because the aftermath of what we got. I know you saw that. I know you saw the article about 26,000 women in Texas alone are estimated to be pregnant because of a rape since the Texas abortion ban. And they're saying throughout the country, if you collectively look at all the states that have abortion bans, either partial or full, there are upwards of 40,000, or it could be higher, but I think it's 40,000 women carrying babies because of a rape. And that right there, I mean, it is a huge consequence. I don't know what your point of view is, but I tend to be a little bit more sensitive to women's issues because I was essentially raised by a woman. My dad was kind of always there, but my mom was the one who really was there for me anytime I needed somebody in my life to help me. My mom was the one that came through. So she was the parent, the responsible parent that got me to where I am today, because without her, I could be dead or just homeless somewhere wasting away, but so lifting women up is the same as lifting men up. Are you still there, Hal?
I sure am. I'm just listening to everything you said. I think it's very powerful. Okay. I can respond. I didn't want to interrupt because I didn't feel like you were either A, being repetitive, or B, boring. But I will respond. And I've said this to you before. Well, let me just go for a second now, because since you did ask if I was listening, so I was listening, but now I want to respond, and I would have let you go a little longer, and I'll let you get another response. I think, and I've told you this before, and I've said this before, I think the Supreme Court was the best argument to vote for Hillary. I do. And I think that it was a sufficient argument to vote for Hillary. Just as I think, in other words, if you said, I'm voting for Hillary because of the Supreme Court, I wouldn't argue with you. I wouldn't say, well, but what about this or what about that? I'd be like, okay, I get it. But I also think there were arguments, sufficiently good arguments not to vote for Hillary, that are as strong as that or almost as strong. And I'll give you a few. Hillary's support for absolutely awful foreign policy adventures in the 21st century that have been so harmful, so devastating, so costly, and so, in the end, dangerous to us. Putting aside what the millions that the Iraq war displaced and killed, putting aside turning Libya into a terrorist training zone. Remember, she was all in for deposing and killing Gaddafi, something she bragged about, which was a very destabilizing action. And if you're talking about women's rights, both Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein, as bad as they were personally, their countries were much more moderate than most Arab countries, and women had rights in those countries. There were women doctors in both of those countries, for example. Now, with not Iraq, because it was ultimately became American state, client state, but many parts of what was Iraq that became under Al-Qaeda, and certainly Libya, now are just terrorist training zones. Those were terrible for women, and Hillary deserves a lot of blame for that. Hillary would have been for the TPP, which was terrible for American workers, including American women workers. So those are terrible policies that extremely devastating. Her support for deposing the state in Honduras, the socialist state, and supporting a military junta in Honduras, very, very harmful for women. She was opposed to, she stopped, I think it's credible to argue she stymied a minimum wage hike in Haiti from 29 cents an hour to 61 cents an hour because Haynes, Levi Strauss would have made a little less money exploiting sweatshop labor in Haiti, almost all of which is black women. So I get the argument about the Supreme Court. I think it's a very strong argument, but I don't think it's the only argument that you have to consider or that one can legitimately consider when making a vote decision.
Okay, but so basically your argument is you're putting foreigners above, Hillary's obviously corrupt to a certain extent, but she is not equally corrupt as Donald Trump. They have their own profiles as far as that goes. And you're saying that you put these women in other countries before the women in your own country. And my response to that is, if we are going to help people in other countries, it's the same thing as when the cabin of an airplane depressurizes. You've got to put your own mask on first, and then you can start helping other people. Because if you put your toddler's mask on first, that's it for you. You're going to die, and then you won't be able to lean over to the other side. Your oxygen saturation just dropped immensely. You got to get yours on first, and then everybody else's around you. And that's, basically how we should be looking at our politics right now. We are currently in a house that is on fire, a neighborhood that's on fire, but we got to get our own house the fire in our own house put out before we can start fighting fires in other people's houses. This is a dire situation for Americans, and it's getting worse. And I understand that Democrats have not come up with great solutions for their solutions for fixing some problems have always taken corporations into consideration before the American people, like with Obamacare. They wanted to make sure that they delivered something to the American people and that it was also a boon for corporations. And at this point, you can't do something both for corporations and the American people because the corporations are basically killing our democracy.
Well, let me just jump in again, John, because, and I agree with what you said, because the interests of corporate elites who actually make the decisions that corporations, for corporations, the interests of corporate elites and of the American public are diametrically opposed. Basically, what's good for big pharma is pretty much bad for the United States. What's good for Apple computing is to a very significant degree bad for the United States. Now, there is some overlap. I mean, we want them to make good computers and they want to make good computers, but they want to make good computers at the lowest possible price with the cheapest possible labor and charge the most they can possibly get for those computers. And that's obviously not what we want.
Yeah, I think what they don't see, Hal, is that at some point down the road, this model of having to have increased profits reported every quarter or year to year, it's gonna have to at some point collapse because it's getting to the point where that model is killing the people who run the machine. And I don't think that I think there are a lot of Democrats, the establishment Democrats, who think that everything's just fine. They drive through town and they see homelessness and they'd like to throw some money at the meth problems and the opioid problems. But I get it. I understand what you're saying. They don't want to deal with the underlying issue, which is making people more financially secure, because that ultimately would mean a cut in production. When people have more money and more time, then they would take time off and spend with family, and that would be a cut in production. And essentially that would be, what started
it would reduce their advantages. It would reduce the privileges and advantages of the elites if we insisted on fair play.
Yeah, because earnings per share would start going downward. It would start trending downward. And that's their biggest nightmare because their wealth is all in, securities. That's their capital. That's where they've got a significant amount of their wealth. And so that system is what is cannibalized. It's the engine that.
John, let me just tell you, you're coming in rough. You're coming in very sketchy. I don't know if you're driving or you're in a tough area, but we're missing every other word now.
I'm sorry. You know what it is? Can you hear me okay now?
Now you came back. You're good now.
Okay. Yeah. So I drove past Naval Post Graduate School, and there's really bad signal.
They don't like what you're saying. They're blocking you out. They're embargoing you. All right, let's wrap it up, man. I don't mean to be rude, but I've got about 20 minutes left. So if you have one more topic, you're good. I hear you, John. I don't think we fully disagree. I don't think your arguments are totally off base. I think where there's a disagreement, let me just parse this and then I'll let you respond to it. And I say this to Arlen too. I think where we disagree is I don't see the Democratic Party is making incremental changes for the better. I think they're now at a point where at least their establishment, their leadership is also making things worse in the areas that are most important to me. Environment, peace, workers' rights, worker justice, and the like.
So here's, if you like Jill Stein so much, my response is this. She's got a much better chance of becoming president as a Democratic insurgent candidate than she does as a third-party candidate. As a third-party candidate, she is a spoiler that will bring us more evil clowns on the Supreme Court. That's what's going to happen. If you want her really to be in power, somebody's got to talk to her and say, look, your best chance is jumping into the Democratic race and getting up and debating with those people and telling them why they're wrong.
But they're not having debates, John. There's no debates. They're not even having debates.
They will in 2024. I understand.
28.
They've
28. Yeah.
Biden. But wait a minute. I guess what is it? He's being primaried from within by Williamson and
Dean
Kennedy
Phillips.
is an independent, right?
He is. RFK Jr. is running his own thing, but there is another Democrat. His name is Dean Phillips. He's not well known. He is a kind of a sort of an obscure Congress member.
Yeah. And doesn't he have to hit a certain polling he's got to hit like a certain polling number in order for there to be debates. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, I don't know what the rules are for that, but it was the DNC that made the decision, I believe, not the corporate media, that there wouldn't be debates.
But I think that I'm pretty sure that he's got to have X amount of supporters in order for there to be, for it to be considered a viable challenge.
I think that's a fair point. I don't say you're wrong. I think there is, it's very unlikely that Marianne Williamson or Dean Phillips could possibly defeat Biden, but I would like to, have an opportunity to hear Biden's views challenged, and they're not. They're just not. The media doesn't challenge them. So it would have been, we did see during the 2016 race, we actually saw competing visions in the Democratic primary. We haven't seen it, really haven't seen that, I guess, in 2020 to a degree with Bernie too, although he moved to the center then. I think we're desperate for competing visions for America, and we're not getting them.
I don't think Bernie moved to the center. I think that he was just being very cautious, and he didn't want to. I mean, after what happened on Super Tuesday, and I don't know if you ever really looked into that, but of 2020, but we talked about that. There were some really screwy things that happened there, and I think Bernie kind of just looked at that and said, you know what, they're just simply not going to let me win, so I'm going to back out and endorse Joe Biden. And if you have a script to New York Times, go back and look at all of the opinion polls leading up to Super Tuesday, and then look at the exit polls on Super Tuesday, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
Well, I'm not arguing with you. I mean, I would say his positions. Let me say this about Joe Biden. One of the most appealing aspects to me of his campaign in 2016 against Hillary is he talked over and over and over about trade, about jobs. And I did not hear him talk about trade in 2020.
Yeah. All right, Hal.
Thanks, buddy.
You have your show
hey,
back.
John, it was I really always love hearing from you. Thank you for calling. That's John in Monterey, and he is gone. So that opens up the line if you want to join me. 240-242-5646. I want to talk about local Democrats in the time remaining. Well, or I should say state. It's not local. But why, again, I just can't get even a little bit enthusiastic about this group of candidates or this group of leaders, of elected leaders. Wes Moore is the governor of Maryland. And he kind of came out of nowhere. And I honestly, I'm not a big believer you have to have paid your dues, or I want to see somebody who started running, when they were in city council and then they moved up to the state level or the county level. I don't believe in all that stuff. I want the candidate who has the best policies. And if it's a choice between a candidate with really good policies and another candidate with really good policies, and one is in Congress and worked their way up and the other didn't, I'll take the politician. Yes, because I think there's real value in experience. And I don't think it's just anyone can do it. But what's even more important to me than experience and demonstrated skill in the area of politics, what's more important to me is that you vote the right way on issues when legislation comes up, or you govern in a way that addresses the needs of poor, struggling, and working people. That's the most important thing to me. Wes Moore came out of nowhere. He was a hedge fund guy or some kind of financial guy, maybe not hedge fund exactly, but an investor of some sort. He made his name through Oprah, I think, same as Marianne Williamson. I don't know why Oprah should be a gatekeeper for our politics. That doesn't sound right to me at all, not even close to right. We're talking about a multi-billionaire at this point, one of the wealthiest people in the world. So I'm not like clear why, because, you know, Marianne Williamson got the Oprah imprimatur, suddenly she's a good candidate for president. I don't see that. Likewise, Wes Moore. But, well, I don't want to say but. So I read this headline in our media, Maryland Matters, which is a really good newspaper that we get online here. And I saw this and I thought, well, that sounds good, right? $15 million to reduce childhood poverty. And I looked into this a little bit more. And so this is a real problem. Maryland is an affluent state. But like many blue states, like many Democratic states, the poverty rates are high, just like in California, just like in New York, just like in these sort of states where there's a lot of sort of self-congratulatory, virtue signaling progressives, or proclaimed progressives who think that, you know, they're right, and anyone who votes for, even would consider voting for Republican, there's something wrong with them. I get that perspective. I don't buy it. I try to understand why people support who they support and give them the benefit of the doubt. But there's a lot of, self-righteous blue voters in Maryland for sure. And they're also pretty damn rich, a lot of them. Certainly more, they may not perceive themselves, but hey, if you own your own home and you have no trouble making your monthly payments, you have a little bit of money for vacation, you're privileged in this country. You're certainly relatively privileged in this country. Moore proposes $15 million to address childhood poverty. There's 160,000 plus poor children in Maryland as of, I guess, 2022, right, according to Maryland Matters. Wes Moore, and you can see it, he's pushing legislation to provide $15 million in state funds. Do you know how much $15 million, how far that goes? That's less than $100 a child a year. Less than $100. It's nothing. It's not going to rescue those kids. The difference between poor and not poor is not $100 a year. It's not $100 a month. I don't even think, and I know there's the guaranteed minimum income. It would cost a hell of a lot more. You want to guarantee every family $15,000 a year, some sort of minimum income. It's going to cost more than that. And it's also not going to solve the problem. $15,000 is poverty wages in Maryland. Is very serious poverty. You can't get an apartment. $15,000 a year doesn't get you an apartment. The solutions have to be based on what I believe, this is, what we as a society recognize as essential to a decent life. Healthcare, education, secure retirement, meaningful, fairly compensated remuneration. That's what we need. That's the kind of government program we need, not $15 million to help bolster communities with high rates of child poverty. I'm not saying we shouldn't help those communities. We should. But there has to be a global, a all of the above approach. And that says, this is what you get. This is because you're a human being. This is what every Marylander is entitled to. And that's not what the Democrat is proposing. That's not what the Democratic mayor is proposing. Here's what he's proposing. And what's amazing about this to me also is it's really de minimis, right? I mean, it's not much. But okay, it's still something. I mean, it would help. It's better than nothing. And by the way, why aren't we talking about corruption in government? One of the things that really helped Trump win was he talked about draining the swamp. Now, he didn't drain the swamp, but he talked about it. There's so much waste. There's so much corruption. I see it right here in my community. The public school system is so corrupt at the top. Favorites get promoted. There are multiple layers. I saw this when I worked for the DC government, which I actually thought was a pretty damn good, responsible place, where there was a real commitment to doing the right thing for the citizens in the district. But you would have some agencies, that's the term I was struggling for, some agencies where you would have supervisors and you would have commissioners and you would have leaders in those agencies who would build very bloated, overstaffed bureaucracies. They would reward friends. They would insulate themselves from criticism. They would not get their hands dirty with the actual work of government to help people. That's what government should be about, helping people. And yet we see there is so much waste and there is fraud, and it's true. It just is the case. But nobody talks about it, because if you're in charge, you don't want to say, oh yeah, we're corrupt. I mean, who's going to say that? Trump said it, he got a lot of votes, and then once he got into office, he didn't do anything about it. So the Democrats proposed less than $100 per impoverished child. And by the way, that's not good enough. That's too much. I would say that's not good. It isn't good enough. But that's not the response of the legislature, of the Democratic-controlled budget, veto-proof legislature in Maryland. And the response of the Senate leader, the majority leader in the Maryland Senate, Ferguson, is surgical cuts. It's too much. He's asking for too much. $15 million. And he also ruled out any tax increases to pay to address these types of, human suffering problems. He won't even do that. And this guy Ferguson, I forgot his first name. I can't remember the first name. The Adrian Jones is the Democratic House Speaker in Maryland, the House of Delegates. She's a speaker. And Ferguson, I can't remember his name now, is the Senate Majority Leader. And they're all in for the billionaire class. They're all in for the lobbying class. They are not. And he makes it clear, we're not going to raise taxes. Human need comes last. Human suffering comes last. Regardless of which party is in power. It is one where I am, so I've done my hour. I actually I wanted to talk a little bit about why, and John called, which I really appreciate, but took me on my schedule a little bit, why I think the Green Party isn't going to win elections, but mostly it's just they're not perceived, right? I mean, perception is reality. They're not perceived as a party that can win. But and I don't blame them for that. I really don't. I mean, they have very little money because they don't champion the causes that the billionaire class supports. That's why the libertarians do have money, because many billionaires are libertarians. They like the idea of no government because they like to think that they're special people who deserve what they got and no one should be trying to take it away from them as they see it. But very few billionaires like the idea of restrictions on their ability to pass billions to their whoever they want. Very few billionaires like the idea of restrictions on their ability to even amass $1 billion, right? I mean, they don't want much higher taxes, and they don't want to be told you can't treat your workers like crap, and you can't move your operations overseas, and you can't keep dumping effluent waste into the nearest stream when you manufacture in destructive ways. They don't want to hear any of that. So they're billionaire libertarians. There aren't billionaire Greens. There are very, very, very few. But all that said, and recognizing those kind of institutional, logistical hurdles that are not the fault of the Green Party, and in fact reflect the positive nature of the Green Party, they're taking on power and wealth. They do a few things they think make it more difficult for them to get widespread support. I was going to talk about that, but it'll have to wait. So tune in tomorrow, and I'll get to some areas where I really think the Green Party is very much off kilter, very much making mistakes. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening. Thanks, John, for calling, and have a great afternoon.